Shalom everyone. This will be a very special lesson, and in honor of the release of the new Sepher, which is called Sitra Achra. If you guys are watching this, of course, on YouTube, I will leave a link for it down below. This book contains a transcript of the many private lectures that I gave regarding the sod of the actual Sitra Achra. Its depth, the theological components, and ultimately the meaning behind it. So I'd like to share a small glimpse of some of the teachings that are to be found inside of it here with you all today. You will see on the back cover of it the hierarchy of the Sitra Achra, including all 11 levels of the klipot, the ministers, and the different destroying angels, so on and so forth. On the front of it is shown a picture of the Simsum alongside the 4 levels of the klipa, the level of iniquity, the level of the destroyer, the level of anger, and the level of terror, as well as secrets of Adam Bel. Now, one of the things that people need to understand about the nature of Adam Bel is that, as opposed to traditional understandings of the term Belial, which many associate, of course, with the goetic demon and many other different demonic hierarchies that list Belial there as a type of demon, in Kabbalah, although there is a Shaddam, a demon called Belial, we usually refer to Adam Bel. Now, the word Belial, usually translated as fool, is rooted in the word nothingness. It appears in the Sepher Yirah, as it is written 10 spheros of Balima, that is to say 10 spheros of nothingness. And the L at the end of it is not like the angels, Michael, Gabriel, so on and so forth, which end with the letters Aleph and Lamed, a name denoting God. However, in the word Belial, it is Ain Lamed, which means upper, quite literally. Thus the word Belial means the upper nothing. And therefore Adam Bel means the Adam of the upper nothing. He's referenced in the Lurianic corpus, specifically in Y.I.R.A.H, and you can see Tikkunei regarding this matter in very esoteric Kabbalistic sephers dealing with tikkuns, that is to say the keys or the diagrams dealing with the explanations from this very complex Kabbalistic treatise. Y.I.R.A.H, of course, is the central corpus of Lurianic study laid down by Chaim Vital, the chief disciple of the arizal. And in that work, he discusses the nature of Adam Bel, in which the height of this Adam Bel is the same as the height of Adam Kedusha, that is to say, the Adam of holiness. And it reveals and explains that it includes within inside of it all of the worlds, that is, all the way from the world of Adam Kadmon to the world of Atzilus, B'rei, Yetzir, and Messiah, except in the form of the klipot, which we call the Sitra Achra, rooted in the Aramaic word for the other side, commonly referred to in the Western world as the demonic or left-hand path, or so on and so forth, which are all titles, of course, given to its nature and understanding. But today, I'd like to share with you all a small glimpse of the true roots of primordial evil, which very few Mechabalim have actually dealt with. What exactly is primordial evil, and how did it actually come into existence? The first and most important key element to this is a basic foundation in Lurianic understanding. Luria, of course, being Rav Yitzhak Luria, is probably the most famous Kabbalist of all times. His teachings ultimately reshaped and reforged Judaism as we know it through mainly his chief disciple Chaim Vital, who was Talmid Hacham in his own life. In fact, so much so that when he first met the arizal, he did not see him for who he truly was. He was already very well known for his knowledge of the Talmud, so on and so forth. But I digress from that. The arizal centralized all of his teachings around the Zohar. Sepher Zohar, which emerged mysteriously in the 1300s, has links, some say to the Knights Templar, some say it is the actual Holy Grail, some say it was uncovered by the Templars underneath Solomon's Temple Mount, and that it was revealed to one of the original Templars by Rashi, the location of it, in which they of course found this scroll filled with mystical commentary, which is the central corpus of all Kabbalistic thought. Luria would take these teachings and ultimately bring them out, the inner levels, and he taught them to his chief disciple Chaim Vital over the course of a year or so, in which he had to spend time with him, led by Eliyahu and various malachim that would come and teach him the divine mysteries behind the Zohar. These teachings would ultimately reshape and reforge all of Judaism to such a degree that even in the Orthodox circles, many of the things that we do and the change in certain practices and so on and so forth can be attributed to Luria himself. One of the main focuses that I'd like to discuss here is, what is evil? Where did evil come from? Now, shortly after Luria, there was, in that school in Safed, there was a major Mekubel. His name was Ramchal. It's short for Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. And his teachings were very controversial, to say the least. They burned some of his books. He was threatened with excommunication in other places. Some people believed that he had messianic tendencies, so on and so forth, and found some of his teachings very dangerous. For example, he apparently wrote a new Psalms, meaning an entire book of Psalms filled with mystical writings. Of course, we do not have anymore because it was one of those things confiscated. He was forced to sign various documents that he would not teach the Kabbalah, so on and so forth. And yet his writings, such as Kenot Hashem Zevaot and others, survive until today and massively reformed and reshaped the theological components of Kabbalah. Being deeply versed in the Lurianic teachings, he expounds many deep concepts, which to say he was initiated would be an understatement. In fact, he was more like an embodiment of the Holy Luminary during his lifetime. One of these major works that he would produce is called 138 Openings to Wisdom, a Sepher which included 138 insights and tikkuns and keys, settling difficulties that comes about in the theological components of the Kabbalah. In this Sepher, he states two things that were incredibly radical, and in all translations of it, they do due diligence and include this tikkun despite the radicalness of what is stated. The first thing, when he expounds as to the reason and purpose for creation, Ramchal states explicitly in 138 Openings of Wisdom that the purpose of creation was to bring forth a place for evil, that it may ultimately be tikkun for the good. Now this, of course, is startling, because what he is stating is that the entire essence and purpose of reality and all of the existences, both above and below, were for the explicit purpose of bringing into being a place for evil. And yes, that it may ultimately be corrected for the good, but nonetheless, evil. He further goes on to state that the 10 spheros themselves were formed and created by the Rashimu, a concept we'll hopefully discuss in just a little bit here. Now, I'd like to break away from these basic foundational understandings and things that many Mekubalim who study the authentic systems stray away from. And that is to say, what does he mean when he says, for the purpose of evil? I was asked this by a student who became greatly perplexed and disturbed by the idea that God caused all of existence to come into being for the purpose of evil. And I explained that if you were the infinite, because in the beginning was the infinite, it expounded to the boundary of the infinite, and there was no end to its boundary. There was no differentiation within inside of the infinite. There was only a unified singularity of limitless light. And if you were all knowing of self and all being of self, and there is only you and nothing outside of you, nothing within inside of you, no differentiation whatsoever, but all is filled and there is no vacancy, what would be the one thing you would like to know? The answer to that, of course, is what you're not. And therefore, it is written, when it arose in the king's desire, in that he should even have a desire. For a desire within itself is already contradictory to the nature of the unified singularity. It caused a restriction within the midst of the illimitable, which withdrew from all directions, precisely in the center, creating a vacancy where there was no vacancy, a depth where there was no depth, a place in which creation would come into existence, in which all that he is not would come into being. For the opposite of a unified singularity is a limited multiplicity. The opposite of being unbegotten is being begotten. The opposite of being perfect is being imperfect. The opposite of being unchanging is to change. The opposite of being one is being many. Now, with these understandings, we can begin to reconcile the difficulties of what's being said. Not so much that one should understand that the purpose was to bring forth evil, but rather that evil is only one of the attributes that were brought into existence. The true purpose of creation was to bring forth into existence everything he is not. That is to say, the opposite. And therefore, at the highest level, he is a unified singularity, and behold, we are a limited multiplicity. The endless is perfect, and we are imperfect. The endless does not change, and we change. At the highest level of existence, the illimitable is in control of everything. And the opposite of being in control is obviously not being in control. And so we have choice. The opposite of being one is being many. And so with these basic fundamental understandings, we can start to see exactly what's going on in reality. It helps us to explain the difficulties of why imperfections exist. Imperfections exist because what is the opposite of being perfect? The answer to that is being imperfect. And so many philosophers and many different spiritual seekers have come to the conclusion and decried that everything is God. But in reality, we are everything God is not. Now, to understand a little bit about the nature of the Sitra Achra, about the origin of primeval, we must understand that when the illimitable withdrew itself, it withdrew itself from all directions, and that the desire that was latent within inside of it was to probe, to create, to manifest from potential into action, all of those things which would be called attributes or parts. Therefore, this withdrawing of the light, which created a vacancy where there was no vacancy, a division where there was no division, a limit where there was no limit, a height and a depth where there was no height and depth, brought forth by this withdrawal a place for the creation to come into being. And this very first step, which we call Simsum, which means contraction or restriction of the illimitable light, left within inside of it a small trace of its own light. But of course, it was withdrawn. Like a bottle of olive oil, if the oil was poured out, a small trace of the oil would still be inside of it. In the same likeness, Though the light withdrew and contracted with itself, relinquishing power of its own self, likened to going to sleep, the loss of consciousness to bring forth the dream. A small trace residue of that illimitable light remained within that place, and we call that Rashimu. Rashimu has many different terms and is commonly referred to as the residue. Ramchal states regarding this Rashimu, regarding this residual substance from the withdrawal, that the 10 Sefirot were created from it. Now I will tell you a secret. Luria famously stated, the husk comes before the fruit, the klipa comes before the fruit. And this is the reconciliation to many of the deep perplexities inside of the Torah. For example, darkness preceded light. In the beginning we read, Bereshis, bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And yet, in verse 3 we read, Vayomer Elohim yehior v'yehior. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. Therefore we understand from this statement that in the beginning there was no light. Therefore the heaven and the earth was brought forth in darkness. In the same likeness that in the order of births, Cain preceded Abel. Cain being the husk, and Hevel or Abel being the fruit. In the same likeness, Ishmael was the husk, and Isaac was the fruit. Esav was the husk, and Yaakov was the fruit. The land of Canaan was the husk, and the land of Israel was the fruit. And so we find that the order of things is that the husk precedes the fruit, darkness precedes light, etc. And so too at the highest level does this apply. For the withdrawing of light was death. Death is descent. What is the opposite of being eternal? The answer to that is being temporary. Therefore, all that is within sight of those limits is temporary. And therefore, the withdrawal of light from all those directions to create that vacancy that I speak of is death. And everything brought forth into it dies. And so death would be the primary source and function, the root of everything in existence. This is the sod of many deep things, many difficult bezuchim. For example, in the Talmud, a certain Rav that slept with many harlots went to perform teshuvah. He was rejected. He went to the mountains. Why are you coming to us? Holy One, blessed be He, has destined to destroy us as well. And behold, even the stars shall die, and so too shall the planets. And every day countless cells go through the process of life and death, for death is infused into everything. For the opposite of life is death, and everything brought forth into the opposite of what God is perishes. Now, to return to that, death is descent into the light descending and restricting, creating depth and density within inside of the vacancy. The place in which the light was withdrawn is death, for death, as I've stated, is descent. And this very first act, the very first act of creation, the withdrawal of the light, is darkness. The very first act is death. The very first act is the root of primeval. We call that Orlo Makshava, thoughtless light. Thoughtless because it was without thought. There was no direction towards its initial state. But the vacancy that was brought forth, the place that we call the thoughtless light, has no thought because it has no differentiation yet. It is only an empty vacancy, a place where differentiation will come into being, but at this point is only emptiness. And inside of this great nothing, this balima, this secret of Adam Bel. Inside of this, that nothing identified itself with the illimitable, which we call Ein. Ein means nothing. And there's a misconception amongst those who know of these things, in which some believe that the Ein is something. They have this imaginary understanding that the Ein is somehow this light, or that substance should apply to it, or that anything should apply to it. And the answer is nothing applies to it. Nothing applies to it because it is nothing. It is boundless, infinite potential, unmanifested. Boundless, infinite, non-manifested potential. It is nothing. And within that first step of the restriction, that first step of the withdrawal, identified itself precisely with nothing. And this is very critical to understand, because it was connected, one, to the limit, from which the place from which it withdrew was from every direction, creating a limit where there was no limit. And that limit was connected specifically to the Ein, which is the infinite nothing. And because it was connected to the infinite nothing, that place, that vacancy, identified within its essence, its atzmos, its shorosh, its panemios, nothing. And this is very important to understand. The reason being because the next step of existence is when the endless begins to enter into that place by way of a light, which we call the Y.I.R.A.H, which manifests what we call the Adam Elyon, or Adam Kadmon. The garment of God in the form of the 10 spheros, arrayed in the image of a divine human being, by which all of the worlds will come into being, so on and so forth. Now this aspect of the linear light entering in and manifesting one level at a time to another level at a time would create differentiation where there was no differentiation, and creation where there was no creation. This light of the illimitable entering in and personifying differentiation, which we call the Adam Elyon, is the initial acts of creation. However, herein lies the great mystery. The secret lies within that Rashimu that I spoke of, within that residue that was in the initial vacancy that identified itself with the Ein. As the light began to pour in and animated that Rashimu, and so there was that which was brought into existence by means of the light, and that which was brought into existence by means of the Rashimu, by the residue. The residue that remained from the withdrawal that was death. And when that light entered in and animated that Rashimu, it gave differentiation to the residue. That which had originally been Orlo Makshava, the thoughtless light, was now animated. It was animated by the light that poured in. And when it was animated, it was rooted in that source in which it identified with. That is to say, Ein. That is to say, nothingness. And as a result of this, all of these worlds would break out and ultimately be destroyed. And so our sages say that the Holy One, blessed be He, was creating and destroying worlds, countless worlds. Our sages say that 7 worlds, 7 entire existences, universes came into being before this one did, and all of them were destroyed. Why were they destroyed? Because there was a war that broke out. And what do I mean by a war? Some say makloches, disagreement. And what was it? The answer to that question is that there are those things that were brought into existence by the light that poured in, and there were those things that were brought into existence that were animated by that light that was brought in, mainly the residue that was from the initial withdrawal, that was called the thoughtless light, that identified itself with Ein. And now being animated and being manifest in each in place in which they were manifest, to each world in which they were manifest, sought to destroy those things that was the light, that was creation, and to return everything back to Ein, return everything back to the primordial state, to return everything back to the highest state, undifferentiated, unmanifested, nothing. And therefore countless existences came into being and were destroyed. They were destroyed because in every place in which the light manifested and inadvertently animated and differentiated and manifested, that Rashimu, that thoughtless light. And so our sages said that the Torah was written with white fire and black fire. The white fire was from the light that poured in, and the black fire was from the Rashimu, the residue of all of that which remained from the initial withdrawal. And in each and every place, sphere after sphere, world after world, shattering by shattering. And so we call this the Sepher Yirah, the shattering of the vessels. And every single one of these vessels shattered, one by one. And the answer again is because in every place that the light brought into existence, creation and differentiation, it inadvertently brought life to the residue that remained from the initial withdrawal. And as it brought into existence and animated those things from the initial withdrawal, it brought into beings, entities of the other side. And so the height of holiness was equal to the height of unholiness. And so Adam Bel's height was the height of Adam Kedusha. And in every single place, they were destroyed. Because that which was brought forth in all of those realms warred against that, to destroy all of those created things, to return them back to the state of nothing. The reason being is because creation itself, differentiation itself, was a sin against the primordial existence itself. It brought separation and division. It brought the opposite of the primordial state, being the infinite nothing. And so with each shattering, with each world that was brought into existence, with each infernal hierarchy that rose up to wage war against all of those heavenly and holy hierarchies, and with each shattering of each vessel and each world destroyed one by one, although they would seek to destroy all of those things brought into existence and animated by the Rashimu, they could not destroy the essence. The reason being is because the essence was not of their side. Although the thoughtless light was animated by the thoughtful light that entered in and ultimately brought it into existence, differentiating it. And although it would overcome at the cost of the shattering of countless vessels and the destruction of countless worlds and universes, it could not destroy the essence and root of what those things were, because they were animated of the great Ein. They were animated from the Rashimu, from that first primordial state, from the Adam Bel, from the great nothingness. And so shattering by shattering, sparks would descend into the lower worlds, and as the light would pour in, one ring by one ring would be destroyed. One ring by one ring would be destroyed. And the shattering of all of those vessels would descend into the depths of the abyss, of the Techomim. And it would awaken from the depths of that abyss those primordial entities which are forbidden to be spoken of, far beyond the order of all of those things we call Shadim and demons, all of those things that Western esotericism deals with, primordial evil, something far beyond the comprehension. And because The Rashimu had been animated and differentiated, and although they had been destroyed, their root had not been destroyed. And when they fell into their root to be gathered in the depths of that great abyss, where differentiation now applied to it, where it was once lo makshava, thoughtless light, but now sparks of the residue that had been brought into being by that thoughtful light which had animated it, differentiated the abyss. And out of the abyss was called the Tanin Gedol, the great primordial dragon, the great primordial serpent. Now what is this? To this point, I've already revealed many deep secrets regarding things that are only whispered about. I will tell you that at the conclusion of the shattering of all of those vessels, at the conclusion of the shattering of all of those worlds and the manifestation of that thing that we call the tree of life, the worlds, the partsus, they remained here, Malchus, the Nukva, which we call the Klipa Noga, and many other different terms. And underneath it, all of those grades of the abyss, all the way down to that place called Al Pnei Tehom, the face of the abyss. And our sages say, what is Al Pnei Tehom? It's Al Pnei Hamaves, it's the face of death. Why is it the face of death? Because it is the reason why everything perishes. It is what kills everything in existence. What is it that darkens and destroys, rots and decays all things? But there is a primordial force, a primeval force, that desires to turn creation back into nothing. Because the original state of existence in its highest and purest form was nothing. And therefore, that side sees all of creation as sacrilege, a corruption, going directly against that which is the highest and purest form of reality, a separation from the true God, the Ein, the non-manifested, infinite nothing. And so you must therefore understand what the root of death is, what causes the decay, and all things that come into existence by means of that created light. There is a counter force to everything brought into existence to destroy it. Even the stars will decay, and so will the mountains and everything else. And why? Because there is a counter force to all that is created by that infinite, thoughtless light, which brought forth all of those things, to counter all of those creative things in order to return them to nothingness. And this is the secret of primeval. For the side of the Sitra Achra, the real Sitra Achra, the real primeval, sees creation as a blasphemy, sees it as moving in the exact opposite direction of the true God, which is the infinite, unmanifested nothing, the Ein. And therefore, all of the things that are brought forth by that side, rooted through the animation process of all of those things that came before, through all the shattering of all those vessels and those worlds, are in order to create equal to its opposite, to each created thing, something to destroy it, something to kill it, something to end it, something to destroy it, something to return it to nothing. Because only when everything is returned to nothing will we return to the primordial state of that which God really is, nothing. Thus it is rooted in many deep sayings. And many fools find themselves in the midst of that light, in the midst of that fire, doing the will of that side. For I tell you that all of the created orders which are of the light, which are all of those heavenly hierarchies, which are all of those attributes of God, etc., are all the created order of things. And order is from the side of light and creation. But chaos, death, destruction, is all from the side of the Sitra Achra. And as I stated, as white fire upon black fire, you must know, therefore, and understand that the Torah was written with white fire on black fire. And in the essence of every human being are two houses. Thus it says, to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, Y.I.R.A.H. And that word has two baits, meaning two houses. One house is the house of the black fire, and one house is the house of the white fire. And in the hearts of every human being burns either the white fire or the black fire. Those of the white fire manifest to create order. They seek to heal. They seek to create, to manifest and bring forth beauty, just as the upper light had done in the beginning, bringing forth all of those orders, all of those hierarchies, all of those worlds, all of those divine attributes of God, the heavenly hosts, and more. And then there are those that burn in their hearts with the light of the black fire, who seek to throw off the shackles of order, ruled by the illusion of chaos. They seek to bring down all structures, to return everything into a state of oneness with each other. However, this is the greatest deceit of them all. They find themselves inadvertently on the side of that primeval, the thing that rejects order, the thing that seeks to return to nothingness. It deceives foolish human beings into thinking that by being lawless, by rejecting order, by rejecting light, that they will somehow have a portion in the other side. But they do not understand, as I've stated, that the root of the other side is to return everything to nothing, including itself. Therefore, you have no place in that side. And all of those that manifest that light, that black fire, and are ruled by it, under the delusion that they somehow will remain differentiated after death, that they somehow will be rewarded, that they somehow believe that turning against the very thing that brought them into existence, which is the thoughtful light, that very linear light, that they turn against their own creator, and do so at the cost of annihilation. There is no place for you in the other side, only to become nothing. Therefore it will be as it is said, they will be as if they never were. Now I've gone into great detail and revealed many sublime primordial things about the nature of primeval, about real primeval, about the darkness that underlies creation, about the counterforce to life, about that which seeks to destroy all things, even the stars, the universe itself, and the reasons why death, suffering, and disease, and all of these other things come into being. Nonetheless, it wouldn't be fitting for me to expound even what I've already expounded here in such a public setting. By the great merit of Rick, a great Gaon of this generation, a very humble, elderly man who recorded these divine lessons and lectures and placed them down, annotated, and took them very seriously. They were compiled into the Sepher that I revealed to you in the beginning, which will only be here for a very short period of time, called Sod of the Sitra Achra, the real secret of the other side. not your created demons, not your demonic hierarchies of created things. I mean that great nothingness, the real primeval. If you guys are watching this on YouTube after this upload, I'll leave a link down to obtain a physical copy of it below. But I'd like to thank you all for joining me here this evening to discuss some of these great sublime mysteries regarding the matter. It's one of the reasons why the platform for Skool was created. It's a private place to teach the hidden things, the concealed things, the things not necessarily fitting for public discourse. One, because not everyone is ready to understand such things. When a person receives wisdom they are not prepared for, it causes a shattering of the vessel. And where it was meant to build, it can inadvertently destroy. If any of you here are serious students of the mysteries and are familiarized yourselves with the secrets of the Torah, the Kabbalah, and more, then I encourage and welcome you. You guys can check the link in the bio to join Skool, or I will leave a link in the comment section down below. Many people are limited by financial restrictions to be able to study such things. And if you find yourself in that position, that you are sincere and genuine in your teachings and your studies, I've been known to sponsor many people, so reach out to me personally. I'll share the book with you one more time where these secrets were laid down at. Released as of 48 hours ago. The Sod of the Sitra Achra. As David Amelech said, open my eyes and behold the wonders of your Torah. Amen, everyone. Shalom and Salam.